All right, everybody, welcome back to another Maui Athletics podcast, our live Q&A that we do weekly where we cover all of your questions from around the internet. Just like normal, you guys are giving out so many great questions. I want to get directly into this so we can cover as many as possible because we always have some bleed over into the next weeks. And in fact, we probably have 3 weeks worth of questions that we're getting to right now. We're going to get to all of them. It's just going to take us time to cycle through these types of things. So let's get started. All right. Is there a minimum or maximum amount of time someone should be in a build, or is it really personal preference, tolerance for the fat gain that comes with it, that inevitably comes with the muscle gain, and being in a calorie surplus? This is an interesting question because it's going to be specific, usually to the person. And the real answer for the majority of this is with the way that most people handle bills and with most people's needs. I mean, the reality is that most people do not have that much extra lean muscle mass. Most people are sitting around with very small amounts. That spending as much time in a build as is comfortable and as is appropriate for your health is probably the right choice. And for most people, builds are going to last between 8 months and 2 years. If it's an optimal situation, if we're not looking at the emotional aspect of it, if we're talking about being in proper rates of growth and all these different types of things. Minimum amount of time. I mean, any time that you can spend outside of a calorie deficit is probably a really good thing. Living your life in a calorie deficit, unless you are obese, is probably not the right move. And we all know the benefits of losing excess body fat, but once you're in a normal weight or normal body composition type of situation, and this includes people that are skinny fat, it would benefit you far more to actually build some lean muscle. It comes with so many different benefits. I mean, injury reduction risk, brain health, mood health. It acts as a metabolic sink. So when you have excess glucose in your system, it can get sucked into that as opposed to being put into adipose tissue. It prevents you from falling into things like metabolic disorders. There are all these really big benefits of having lean muscle, and people just don't value that because all they think is, I just want to have a six pack. Well, if you're constantly fighting to get a six pack and you don't have any of the lean muscle underneath to give your body shape, you just end up looking sickly. You become malnutritioned, you look gaunt, you don't look shapely or like an athlete. And this is that stage that you have to come to accept to actually get there. So the majority of people, I would say 8 months to maybe 2 years is probably the right move. However, having said that, any amount of time that you can spend out of a calorie deficit is probably a good thing. And for some people, that is, hey, I'm going to spend the winter months in a calorie surplus, and then I'm going to go into either a calorie deficit or at least sit at maintenance for summer months. And that's okay. You're going to limit your progress over those periods. So it's going to take longer overall to get where you want to be. But if you're okay with that mentally and emotionally, that might be the right choice for you. What do you think, Beth?
So I agree. I do want to add a couple of things there. So do be aware, and this is part of the individuality of all of this, that the longer that you have been training, so if you are somebody who's been lifting weights for years, your rate of muscle growth is slower than somebody who is brand new to lifting on steroids or is obese and detrained. So just keep in mind that if you are somebody who has been lifting for quite a while, if you're doing your first build and you've already been lifting for a few years, you probably are going to want to spend a little bit longer time in a build because your rate of gain, of muscle gain, is going to be less than somebody who's brand new to lifting. And I think there was another part of this question in our group that had to do with the mental part of this. And women in particular really struggle here. It's not, we've been bombarded our entire lives about taking up less space,
You know what's
being
really funny is not to cut you off completely, but what's really funny is prior to coaching, I would have agreed with that. And now having worked with more and more men, men seem to be just as insecure over this type of
really,
thing.
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to me because, and I agree with the sentiment that you're putting out there. And women probably have more challenge in this area because society is a little bit less forgiving about
Right, and that's
women.
kind of where I was going with that, is
I
that
agree.
we're conditioned
Yeah.
to want to be tiny versions of ourselves, right? So to intentionally grow your body, whether that be with muscle or with fat, it doesn't matter. If you're just getting bigger, it's kind of like, ugh. And it is uncomfortable. Everybody, I've done multiple builds. When I was doing figure competitions, I did two builds. Both of them were very uncomfortable. I gained about 20 pounds with one of them and 15 pounds with another. And that's not easy to do because you're talking about having to go and buy new clothes oftentimes to fit a larger body, knowing that you're going to go back down at some point. So there's money spend involved there as well.
And that's
Um,
something that people should probably accept as something that they
yeah,
need to do. Having two sets
yeah,
of clothes, if you're in the fitness lifestyle,
yeah,
having two sets of clothes is probably a good thing because if you're constantly saying, well, I always want to be that small, tight look that I always have, and you only have those clothes, you're going to feel more and more uncomfortable during a
yeah.
build as your
Be
clothes get tighter and
sausage.
tighter.
Yeah. And honestly, if you do a build right, you maybe shouldn't even be fitting into clothes that you fit in before you're like even after you lose body fat
It depends
in
on
your
starting body
one.
comp, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean you might not ever fit back into those clothes again. So all of this to say it is a very difficult process mentally. Every single person that has done a build with me, the builds that I did myself, we all get to a point in the build where we're kind of disgusted with ourselves, whether or not that's logical. So you might have a day that you look in the mirror and you're kind of like squeezing your belly fat and it just kind of grosses you out. So there are two things that I want to say about this. One, you have to sort of separate that in your mind and start to focus on the physical aspect of what a build means in terms of becoming stronger, faster, more agile, more mobile. All of those things are going to come with an increase in strength. Focus on the physical gains that you're making. You're probably going to be setting some pretty nasty PRs in the gym on really heavy lifts, and that accomplishment needs to be the focus, is how much stronger you're getting. The second part of this is fat loss is easy. Fat loss is literally the easiest part of all of this. And if anybody who is doing a build has done fat loss previously and has been successful with it, you know you can do it. You've already done it. You know that road ahead of you in the future is the icing on the cake. It is the easiest part of all of this. So if you can get through a build, you know you're going to crush the fat loss phase. So you just have to get through the suck and get through the hard part and know that you're going to crush something that you've already known you can handle and have previously crushed.
Let me give some objective metrics. So Beth is touching on the kind of like emotional and psychological aspect, which is probably the harder aspect of it. Let me give some objective metrics to make this easier. What she said is more important than what I'm about to say. But what I'm saying can be used in conjunction with what she said and can give you some guidelines to be able to set these things up correctly. So we talk about the fact that having excess body fat is problematic. There's that whole argument that we've talked about in the past where people say, well, you don't need to be in a build to optimize lean muscle gain. That is completely not true as far as the data currently shows us. And as I mentioned before, if anybody is interested in that, the Allan Aragon Research Review, I'm doing a collaborative series with Allan and we're going over all of the research, and the research does currently suggest that for many populations of people, a build is the right move if we want to optimize the muscle building. The main gaining, maintaining, all those different types of things seems to work really well if you're like on massive amounts of steroids, if you're near your absolute peak. They're technically still in the build. They just don't realize it because the builds become smaller in a calorie surplus as you become more advanced. Um, but as objective guidelines, so we can balance the health aspect of this, have you feel comfortable with, yes, you're going to feel fluffy, you're going to feel bigger, bloatier, fattier than what you think is your optimal. That's true. That's exactly how it's going to be. How do you know whether that's the right position to be in or whether you're becoming slovenly? And so this is where I want to give some objective measures. If you are a person that is looking for a guideline, you can use online examples of body fat percentages. Just looking at yourself in progress photos, you can kind of tell if you're in a good like progress photo what your rough body percentage is. And this is what I would recommend rather than spending money on one of those scans. But if you're a man between 10 to 20% body fat, continue building. You're perfectly fine. If you're a woman between 20 and 30% body fat, you continue building. You're perfectly fine. When you start to go above those, this is where I would start to question, okay, well, am I putting on too much body fat for this goal? And now am I starting to move outside of that health range that I want to be in? And so there are people that are going to sit above that. Those people are typically strongmen or powerlifters or something like that. If we're talking about physique itself, those are good guidelines to say, okay, well, Allan said, within these ranges, I'm still in the right place to be able to build. You might look at yourself and say 18%, and you might say, oh man, I feel like I've got a lot of body fat as a guy. You don't. And your health is perfectly fine in that range. So continue going. There's no reason for you to pull the cord unless it's emotional or psychological in nature. Now you can do mini cuts within your build if that can help. 4 week period of pretty drastic calorie reduction, 3, 4 week period or so of pretty drastic calorie reduction. You can do that if that makes you feel a little bit better and can make it more sustainable. But accepting the fact that you're going to feel fluffier than what you originally thought that you should is right because you're going to. And anybody that goes into this and doesn't think that has probably got the wrong mentality to begin with. And so in this example, the woman who had asked this question says that she's been doing it for 8 months. Great, you've been doing a really good job. The fact that you feel fluffy is probably a sign that you are might be doing it right.
Yep.
And so we want to make sure that we're in those body fat ranges as a general rule. That doesn't mean as a man, you sit at 10 to 11% and you say, okay, well, Allan says 10 to 20% is perfectly fine. I'm just going to sit at 10 to 11%. You can, but you could also be spinning your wheels because genetically, some people can hold lower levels of body fat and be completely fine. Other people, that is like a massive effort for you. And so maybe sitting at 15 to 17% might make a lot more sense for you. The same thing with women. You may not sit at 20%. That's displaying abs in a woman.
Yeah.
You may not sit at that during your build. You may sit at 28%, not displaying abs. And that's okay. Maybe the little outline of abs on the outside, and that's about it. And that's perfectly fine. When you're going in this calorie surplus, I want you to identify your rate of gain over time as your sign of doing the surplus correctly. If you're a beginner in your first 1, maybe 2 years of training consistently, 2% body weight gain over a month is appropriate. If you're an intermediate, and this is less than 5 years of consistent training, 1% body weight gain over a month is correct. If you're an advanced trainee, 0.5% body weight gain over a month.
It
That's
really sucks how
it gets
how
worse and
hard
worse.
how hard the gains come the more. And that's why people that have been lifting for like decades that want to do a build, I'm like, you can, but you're probably gonna have to spend quite a long time in a build to even build anything.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
in a
the
build,
rate of gain is so small when you are a well-trained athlete. It's just it's really it's discouraging. It really is.
so I've put out a thing that looks at rates of progress in both fat loss and muscle gain, and it breaks down what science shows us is an acceptable range or what is a common range for these types of things. Now, this is not accounting for massive outliers in either direction, but this is that bell curve. This is the major part of it. For advanced trainees, you're only gaining 2, 3, 4 pounds of muscle in a year.
A year.
A year. That's
That's
if you're
so
in a build. That's if you're in an optimal build. You are on point with your nutrition. You're getting 8 hours of sleep,
yeah.
and you are training correctly for an entire year. You're putting on 2 pounds of muscle, and that's it. That's all it is.
It's
And
so
so,
sad.
in your first year, you could put on maybe 20 pounds of muscle
Hmm.
if it's optimized. This isn't for the people that are like, okay, well, I'm going to go into a build for 4 months and then I'm going to dick around because I feel fat. No, no, no. This is optimized for a year.
Yeah.
You could put on 16 to 20 pounds of muscle.
Yeah. And that's
As
what
a
I did in my first build when I was first starting to really lift and get into physique competitions. I think I did put on about 20 to 25 pounds in my first ever build. And that was over the period of, I think, like 14 months.
And then diminishing returns kick in
Hmm.
because you're no longer getting newbie gains.
Yep.
And then the next year, you're like, oh, well, these builds aren't really working anymore. Oh, they're working. It's
Yeah.
just, it's working.
It's
It's working the way
hard
that
to
it
see.
works.
And I don't
And
think the other thing that I don't think people conceptualize very well is what like 2 pounds of muscle actually looks like on the frame. You're not really going to see that. But
it's
this
not
is
major, no.
No, and that's why like when somebody's in a build for the first time ever, and let's say they do have the wonderful privilege of experiencing newbie gains, if they gain 20 total pounds on the scale, probably only 10 of that is actually muscle. So that's why people that are doing their first ever build, I encourage them to stay in that build for a little bit longer than they might want to, because this is I feel like your first build is really like your one big opportunity to really kind of knock it out of the park when it comes to actually building good quality muscle because you then have to go through, say, a 12-week fat loss phase. And then if you're like, I didn't really gain much of anything, you've lost all that time that now you're going to have to go back into a build. And now that's even more additional time that you've spent training.
Well,
So,
hopefully during that time period, at least we built like some strength up. At least we built
right.
some, consistency and adherence going into the gym. So, this is another way to say when you do these, take them seriously
Yeah.
and go into them with the right expectations of,
Part
okay, this
around.
is probably going to suck.
Yeah.
And, if you've lost significant amounts of body fat in the past, I find that those people are even more emotionally
Yeah.
vulnerable,
Yeah.
because they hate seeing the scale go up, which is you need to see the scale go up if you're going to be putting on muscle. The scale's got to go up.
The
It's not
scale isn't
going.
moving up, you're not building.
You're not gaining any muscle.
You're not doing it.
And sure, someone's going to say, well, what about recomping? Yeah, I mean, you can recomp if you're obese or brand new to training or on steroids or coming back from a long layoff where you used to have a lot of muscle. You can do it then. But, outside of that first year, year and a half or so, it's going to be painfully slow. And if we're talking about only putting on, you know, 10 pounds of muscle or less in a year for people that are, mildly beginnerish, just outside of that beginner stage. What's going to happen if you then dial back the calories and then slow that down even more? I mean, if you only put on 3 or 4 pounds in a year because you want to not gain any fat, is that going to feel successful to you? And I would say no, it doesn't. But
Yeah.
in the
No bother.
during the process, you're going to say, "Oh, I don't feel good gaining any body fat." And so this is that balance that a coach has to have when you're doing nutrition for somebody. And setting proper expectations. And the reality is that people just don't have proper expectations when it comes to a build in general. I mean, like Beth was saying, cuts are very straightforward,
Easy.
and they're very straightforward. They're easy emotionally for more people. And
Yeah.
obviously this is dependent on the person, but they're easily emotionally for the majority of people because every few weeks you can see that the scale is moving down and that you're getting more and more cut. So it feels, okay, this is working. Whereas with a build, you feel like you look worse for
Yeah.
many months before
Yeah.
you look better. And so Beth's point of switching your signs of success from the scale, the pictures to performance is the answer for this.
Yeah.
How do I make myself feel better about this? You stop thinking about your physique. But
Yeah.
the physique is what matters to me. Cool. Stop thinking
Shouldn't
about
be
it.
in a build.
It has nothing to do with this process at this point. It's the overall goal. And this is why you would program this type of thing because we know that this is what's important to you.
Right.
But you got to forget about it. Because if all you're focused on is that, you're gonna burn out real quick. And that's why most people burn out. I mean, this is why
Yeah.
people don't have muscle
I've had
because they
of
can't
all
separate themselves from this.
Yep. Of all the people that I have had under me as a client that have gone through a build, I would say I've had probably 12 people initiate a build and only 5 people make it through a build. And the person that asked this question in the group, I know her. And I would say to her, you've been doing it for 8 months. I would push beyond the 12-month mark if you can, just because I know she's not new to lifting. So for this particular person, I would say do your best to aim for 14 months if you can.
And hey, if you're a woman and you're going into this, think peach booty, not crack model booty.
Yeah.
That's the best thing that I can say for you.
No pancake butt.
Yeah. All right. When you design your programs, do you think about a particular body part emphasis from cycle to cycle, or do you try to keep it even overall? Um, so here's the thing. When we look at the data for optimizing hypertrophy, it says 10 to 20 working sets per muscle group per week. That counts fractional sets, which means, and this is why people have these massively high volume programs because they don't realize that when this recommendation is given, all the research does fractional sets. And so if you do like a back exercise, that counts as one back and half of a bicep exercise. And so people are like, "Oh, Well,
Yeah.
I didn't really realize that. So like if there's a program that I've written and you're checking it out, or you're asking me to write a program for you, and all of a sudden you only have like 6 bicep sets for an entire week, that's intentional because you
Yeah.
probably have 12, 14 in actual biceps when you count in the half reps. And so people need to realize that that's something. Do I try to make it? Does Beth try to make it? Because we both program with the same idea behind the way that we program, because we're both evidence based. Do we think about overall balance? Yes, we do. Does that mean that every different cycle that I program for every person is going to be evenly balanced? No, it doesn't. And if I look back at a previous cycle and I'm like, man, we were really heavy on legs during that cycle, I might give a little bit more upper body. I'm not gonna shortchange them on the legs, but I might say, hey, look, man, you know, in an effort to give people more hamstrings, because people often, anytime I've ever worked with a person, they've almost never done hamstrings in their life. They do deadlifts for like a couple sets a week and then that's it. They don't do anything else. Maybe some lying hamstring curls and that's it. And so they don't really have that much in their week. I mean, squats do not count as a hamstring exercise. And so that's another point to bring up, by the way, that quad like legs aren't one muscle group.
Hmm.
Legs are quads and hamstrings, posterior and anterior. Just like if you were programming arms, nobody says arms. They think biceps and triceps. I don't know why we don't think that with legs, because they're opposing actions. So you cannot train them at the same time. So when we talk about setting up programs, and when I recommend, if you guys are setting up your own programs, I would recommend trying to build them roughly evenly, unless you have some sort of massive disparity in a muscle group, or you just don't care about a muscle group that much. And you know that one of the things that is an example of that comes up often for me is women will tell me, I don't want to train chest. And I'll say, okay, cool. Well, we're going to get some chest in, but we will deprioritize that. And maybe we'll put that towards what they want. They'll typically say triceps or legs or butt or
Shoulders.
whatever it is, glutes,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And so then we'll put some more emphasis there. But if you're talking about general programming, personal preference certainly comes into play, and that's where you can make those shifts. But when you're talking about general programming, you want it to be relatively even, although legs can probably handle a little bit more volume than things like arms. That's just the way that it is. But that doesn't mean that you have to program like that all the time. So do you attempt to gain balance? Yes, you do. Does it always work out that way? No, and that's okay, because over time, this is something that's not just to get you ready for summer. This is for the rest of your life. You're going to be covering some other things. You might notice, hey, my legs are developing really, really well, and my arms are not. So then you might change it up the next cycle. So there's stuff that happens that way. And when we do our Iron Core group fitness training, we have those pick E1 or E2 specifically to make up for these types of things. So
Yep.
specifically because we realize people have different goals. And so you will often see, and actually this is how we talk about it when we're programming. I'll say, hey, there's not enough upper body for men in this. Let's give them some more upper body. I think that one of the things that we talked about it when we were formulating the last one was we need some more chest in there.
Best.
If
Yeah.
we want to emphasize, because I was like, I'm not happy with the amount of chest that we currently have planned. So let's give an option to do that. But we also don't want to disenfranchise people that want to train lower body a little bit more. So why don't we give those two opposing things that tend to be a preference of opposition, an opposing preference? Let's
Right.
give those two things and allow people to choose based off of what they want to do. And it ends up becoming a really good program that can serve everybody, because those spots where we want to shift the ratio one way or another, we can say, okay, well, what do people normally have as a preference, and put those two opposing preferences in place so then the person can make the right choice for themselves.
Well, and I
Um,
think in this particular cycle, I think this question came up because there actually is quite a bit of chest in this new cycle. I think on both the home gym, I have our spreadsheet up right now. So when Alan and I do this programming, we sort of put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and we actually count, like we have X number of sets of quads, hams, back row, back pull. Like we calculate all of that to make sure that we do have balance over the
yeah,
course of multiple cycles. So this particular cycle on both the home gym and the commercial gym, we have 10 sets of chest, which is more than we've done in prior cycles. So I think because it is higher than it has been in previous cycles, people think we have more upper body volume, but we have pretty much the same volume on everything else. over the course of the cycle. I think it just sort of artificially feels that way because chest seems to be a little bit more prevalent in this particular cycle. But we did that for a reason because it's been deprioritized in prior cycles. So we wanted to give it its moment to shine.
Yeah, deprioritize outside of some of the optionals.
Hmm.
And so people could have chosen to prioritize them with the optionals.
Sure, sure.
But we want to even with like people that are like, oh well, chess doesn't really matter that much to me. We kind of want to force that a little bit in some of the cycles so people so it
Yeah.
doesn't become a lagging body part because even Beth and I have talked about this. Where like what happens if you're older and you fall forward and you have to catch yourself with your hands on the way down? Well,
Push yourself up off
if
the
you've
floor.
trained your chest and your shoulders and your triceps, you're going to be able to stall that fall and not tear a shoulder and
Well,
not,
and just to get on my high horse about this, training your chest, and this conversation is targeted directly to women. Training your chest actually helps everything overhead. So if you're
yeah.
lifting something over your head to put it in the cupboard, or just doing like strict press, or literally any sort of shoulder press, the chest is going to help with that movement. I say this to my weightlifters all the time because snatch and clean and jerk involve getting something really heavy over your head. All of my weightlifters bench for that reason. And keep in mind for the ladies, most women really like nice toned shoulders. Most chest work incorporates a lot of front delt. So if you want nice looking
All
shoulders,
chest work incorporates a
yeah, you're
lot.
going to want to actually work your chest. It doesn't just mean you have that divide down your pecs. It's for overall muscular development of your upper body.
It also incorporates this, and this is something that is misunderstood. It also incorporates a good bit of medial delt.
Hmm.
And so women are like, well, I don't care about front delts. The side delts are also firing. Side delts fire
Well,
a lot in overhead pressing too.
mhm.
And so you don't have to just do lateral raises. Yeah, I love lateral raises and they're a great exercise. But the idea that this is the only exercise that we can do for good shoulders makes absolutely no sense. I mean, look at any Olympic weightlifter. They're not spending their entire time doing lateral raises. Sure, they do some, but they're
Most are
overhead
coming
pressing far
straight
more
up
than anything
overhead.
else.
Yep.
And look at their shoulders. It's incredible. Now, they're on steroids for the most part, but
That's true.
but this just goes to show that like clearly it's working that musculature and it's contrary to popular belief and I don't know why that is. It's just it was one of those weird things that it was like, well, if you want to get strong, you do overhead pressing. If you want to build size, you do like lateral raises, or if you want to build cut, you do lateral raises. It's completely made up. That's fabricated. Lateral raises can build strength. Have you ever done heavy lateral raises? Really
No, because
hard,
I'm
and it
muscular.
will really build strength. It's the same thing. It works both ways. So, all right, moving on. Next topic. This is actually a very good question. I like this a lot. When considering the tempo for a lift, how important is the explosiveness factor? For instance, if I can add more weight to an exercise for to get to a proper reps in reserve, because we use one RIR as our standard for most things. I mean, obviously the programs that we give, we've got the 1 to 2 or 0 to 1. But if I can add more weight to an exercise to reach my RIR, but I'm not as explosive on the concentric, is it more important to add weight or to use less weight and be more explosive? The answer here is it is more important to use more weight. It is more important. Intensity means you are using as much volitional effort as possible. If we're training a movement for pure power, we'll let you know and we can train it for pure power. When we're trying to work within this one RIR, using the heaviest load that allows you to do that is the right move. Now, yes, it will slow down. It slows down because you're firing more of the muscle fibers. That is those actin and myosin filaments connecting to each other, pulling it together. I mean, it's almost like a zipper if you've ever seen a muscle work. It zips together and then it contracts. It takes time for more and more actin and myosin to connect and zip together and then contract. That's why as you get heavier and heavier, it slows down without you even thinking about it. Now, this is what really confuses people about time under tension. People used to say you need to have time under tension to grow. That is 100% not true. It ended up happening because of how the force velocity curve works. As you get higher and higher in force, which creates more mechanical tension, the thing that creates muscle growth, it slows down and your muscle slows down. The rep slows down as you get heavier and heavier because those actin and myosin filaments connecting. It takes more time for them to connect. And so people would think, oh, it's slower. Therefore, the more time that it's under is why it's giving you better results. No, you're getting better results because you're causing more of the muscle to fire more optimally. That's why it's slowing. If you actively slow the tempo too slowly, nothing that we program, but an excessively slow movement in a suboptimal, a submaximal fashion, so you're not lifting as heavy as possible, so you're artificially slowing it down, that makes it so you get less results and more fatigue and soreness. And so I want to emphasize that when people talk about, this tempo and this speed, we want you working within that one RIR as best, or whatever the RIR is that's programmed. We want you to work within that as best as possible, and that will typically mean go up and wait. Even if it slows down, that's okay because you're creating the mechanical tension that is necessary to build lean muscle, build strength, make you more injury resistant, all of those things that we're going for. Anything to add to that, Beth?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay. Let's go over to some of these other ones. Thoughts on Urolithin A as a supplement. So Urolithin A is one of those big time influencer gems. They really like this one right now because you can sell it with an influencer code and make a lot of money off of it. Currently, the data on this is hazy. We don't have enough in humans to really recommend it as far as a practical outcome. There's some mechanistic data that can show that it can improve mitochondrial health, but I mean, lifting weights does that, cardio does that to a greater extent than literally anything else. And so the question that comes is, will urolithin A supplementation do a damn thing for people that actually lift weights? This could be something like the benefits of sauna to cardiovascular health. And if you are somebody that actually does some cardio, it shows that there are no actual cardiovascular benefits to it. So is it that urolithin A only works in people that are completely sedentary? Does it actually cause a benefit to people that actually exercise? We don't have any data suggesting that it does at the moment, but something to keep an eye on. Would I recommend that you spend money on this right now? No, I don't. For anything that we recommend that you actually get, you will likely see it in the resources section in our Mighty Networks community. There are some that we don't have in there that are niche, and I just don't put it in there because I don't want people to think that like we're just throwing out supplements to throw out supplements. Yes, there are some heart health, cardiovascular health supplements that I would recommend that you take if that's a concern for you that I don't have in there. But the majority of the stuff that we recommend, creatine, fish oil, protein supplement, magnesium, um, vitamin D if you need it, potentially with K. Those are the bases. And then once you have those covered, everything else is usually picked up by like nutrition and that kind of stuff. So I would be semi-hesitant to spend money on something like this, particularly if I got it from a podcast.
What is this supplement? What, can you spell it? I don't know. I've never even heard of it.
Urolithin A, Urolithin
Never
space
even
the
heard
letter
of
A. Yeah, I mean it's kind of falling into the same realm as methylene blue,
it. Right.
where it's the podcasters have run out of trying to sell people on cold plunge tubs, and now they're moving on to these things. It's kind of the next thing. And so
Is it
this will
like
burn out in like a
it's
year or
like all the
two.
stuff where they've done like NAD and all that? It's just sort of like
Yeah.
another that.
Yeah, NADNMN was like last year or 2 years ago. This is the next thing. So it's funny because you see this cycle every 2 or 3 years. They get onto these things and then all of a sudden they're off of it completely. And like, when was the last time you heard about like NAD? You don't hear about that much anymore.
Well, so I the reason I brought that up is because I've heard of that recently. Like
Oh,
I've
really?
seen that all over. I think it's making its rounds right now through the CrossFit crowd.
Oh, well, they're
That,
always a couple years behind for that stuff.
yeah, I think that's why I'm seeing it.
Yeah. Staying on the supplement realm, any benefits of using L-carnitine? L-carnitine may increase recovery. It may extend time to exhaustion. It will not aid fat loss. So please do not take this for fat loss. If you have a history of cardiovascular health issues in your family, please do not take it. There is some hazy, but I mean, I'm kind of the opinion that like if we've got some suggestions of like negative health outcomes with something, we're a little bit more conscious of that if we've got a genetic predisposition to those issues. There are some studies out there that suggest that carnitine could add to atherosclerosis. So if you're somebody that is in a family that is prone to heart attacks, maybe you should not take that. Are the benefits of a deload week similar to taking extra rest days and then resuming? Maybe. Depends on how much recovery help you need. And so if you're somebody that needs a couple days of rest because you're beaten up because maybe you weren't sleeping well, maybe you didn't eat right, maybe you went a little bit too hard in the gym, maybe your program has a little bit too much volume, adjust the volume in your program, rest a few days, get back into it. There is no hard set rule for deloads. It's dependent on what you need. And so when we do programming, we will typically do that either after an overreaching week or two, or based on a person's preference and whether they say, hey, I'm really worn down. I've got some nagging injuries. Okay, take a week off. We'll reconvene in a week and see how things are going. Best ways to decrease bloating. Supplements, changes of habit, changes in diet. So it really depends on what the cause of the bloating is. Most likely, you probably need to drink some more water because most people aren't drinking enough water and staying hydrated enough. Um, Maybe you have, I mean, this happens a lot when people change diets. Like I see this all the time. Somebody will sign up with me for one-on-one coaching, get new nutrition, and then all of a sudden the first week they're like, I'm bloated. And
And
I'll
they're
and I'll
not
say,
even
hey, don't
bloated.
worry about it. Calm down, keep going. And then in 2, 3 weeks, all of a sudden it's gone, and then they're leaner than they've ever been. But oftentimes this happens with a change of nutrition because your body's getting used to a new way to eat. It's getting used to typically new fiber amounts if you've started on a health journey that you've never been on before. And so you're going to bloat with changes in nutrition. It's kind of like when you feed your dog a diet that they've never had before, and all of a sudden they're feeling bad. This humans do it too. You need some time to adjust, and that's okay. Um, as far as supplements go, a little bit of mint oil can help calm the stomach. Do you have anything to add there, Beth?
I mean, can we please start differentiating between a little bit of water retention and actual bloating?
Yeah, I mean, when people say that they're bloating, they just mean they have a little bit of water retention. They don't mean actual bloating.
I think they do mean actual bloating though. Like that's my point with that comment is that I think people like genuinely think that a teeny tiny bit of like a little bit of a squishy belly from some water retention, if you ask them, they will say, I look 8 months pregnant. No, you don't.
Now you're fine. You're cool. Keep going. I
No,
like my favorite thing is that when we switch up these diets and that kind of stuff, and they're like, oh, I'm having these all of these like all random issues that are completely unrelated to diet. Like I have no energy anymore. I'm like, but you're finally eating whole foods. They're like, yeah, but McDonald's gave me energy. I'm like, oh my God. All right, next question. Is it okay to have high and low fat days? Yeah, that's completely fine. You can switch up the ratio of, as long as your calories and protein are maintained, you can switch up the ratio of carbs to fats. You do not want to go below your fat minimums. One of the follow-up questions to this is, can I go below my fat minimum? And my recommendation would be, no, don't do that. There's a reason that it's called fat minimum because it's the minimum amount you should have. So stick with that and you're going to be okay. Fats are a necessary, essential macronutrient. The reason that you don't go below that is because you're going to mess with hormone production. You're going to mess with um, nutrient absorption on those days. Like, why would you have like one day not meeting that and then another day having extra? The day that you're not meeting that, you're missing out on those fat soluble vitamins. So, like 50% of your year, you're just not really that interested in absorbing your vitamins to a really good extent. There's no reason to be eating like this. It's very strange to me when people try to do these like very weird extreme things. The same thing with like these extreme like carb cycling diets where people are like, well, I don't want to eat any carbs during the week, and then I want to eat like 6 pizzas on the weekend. And it's like, holy crap, like this is constantly varied in your diet is not necessarily the right move. You're not tricking your body in anything. You're depriving your body and then you're overloading. Like this is a binge and restrict cycle rather
yeah.
than, like carb cycling can work, but if you're carb cycling, it's not that different between your high and your low days. It's relatively close. You just have a little bit of an emphasis on, maybe the weekend because that's when typically people want to do that. Can taking a vitamin C supplement be harmful? So for the topic of this question, I would say are antioxidant supplements harmful because this kind of falls in that realm. Anything that has the potential to be highly antioxidant or highly anti-inflammatory can be harmful. One, you can overload vitamin C. That can cause problems. But the bigger issue and the more likely issue that you're going to run into is you're going to impair your ability to benefit from training if high amounts of these antioxidants are taken within 4 to 6 hours of training on either side. It impairs the beneficial adaptation. An antioxidant is something that is potentially anti-inflammatory, and the inflammatory process that we have from from weight training is a beneficial thing. The cortisol spikes that we have from weight training are beneficial things, and so like these things are completely misunderstood, and it's not something that we want to correct. It's actually something that we want to take advantage of. So don't think that a bodily process is automatically negative. Usually, it's a feature, not a bug. How do I approach caffeine reduction without getting headaches? Okay, so one, make sure that you're drinking adequate amounts of water because that's one of the biggest issues that most people have. They're not doing that, and so then you know, they get headaches and then they look for something to blame and they're like, okay, well, it's the caffeine that's out and it's a misattribution of the fact that you're not drinking enough water. Two, if you're going to be coming off something like caffeine, which does have side effects when you come off of it, titrate down. If you're taking 300 milligrams standardly for months and months and months, drop to 200 for a week or two, then drop to 100 for a week or two, and then go off. Don't go from 300 to nothing. You will get
All
headaches.
right.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to stay awake. It's going
No.
to be awful. So the biggest mistake that people make when they do these types of things is they try to go cold turkey thinking that somehow is a reflection of like your willpower and it's more honorable. It's not more honorable, it's just dumb. So titrate down, you're going to be completely fine. You will save yourself those problems. You'll be able to get back to feeling better in a much easier manner that is, I mean, you're not impressing anybody by doing this cold turkey stuff. Why did some people strength train in their socks? Did we answer this question before?
I don't think so.
Okay. So there's this whole push, and this is really
Oh
funny
my
because we
God.
actually saw this. We were making fun of this. Beth and I were making fun of another, I don't want to say another creator. We're making fun of a claim that another creator was making
Oh yeah,
where
yeah.
he said that everybody needs to be running barefoot because that's how the body's meant to run, which is one of the funniest things in the world because like no running like elite running record has ever been set barefoot. It's people are wearing shoes for a reason because they provide benefits. And so there's a similar thing with strength training in socks. Now, strength training in socks or barefoot actually came from probably a beneficial place and it's kind of being misconstrued a little bit. So the issue is that most shoes, sneakers that people wear are not appropriate for lifting. Running shoes are not appropriate for lifting. You want a
Issue.
hard, flat-soled shoe, hard, like a Vans or a Chuck Taylor. Um, and so because so many people were going into the gym with their, Nike Air Max Pegasus running shoes, which has 3 inches of foam in the heel, and then they were trying to get under 600 pounds of weight, and then their ankles were all wobbly because there was foam and not something that was solid under their feet. They thought, hey, let me take these shoes off and go barefoot. And then all of a sudden it was much better. Yeah, it's a lot better. It's a lot better to be barefoot or in socks than to be in running shoes when you're lifting heavy loads because of the instability that they cause at the ankle. However, if you have the right shoes on, you don't need to do that. If you're wearing Vans, if you're wearing Nike Metcons, if you're wearing Reebok Nanos, these shoes that are made specifically for lifting, you do not need to strength train in your socks. That is something that people were doing to make up for the fact that they did not have the correct shoes. And if you've got a question about it, just get Chuck Taylors. They're not expensive. They're like $50, maybe. And they're super hard. They are very stable. And the Chuck Taylors, I think, too, I mean, they lace up around your ankle. So there's a little bit of ankle support there. So they're great. You don't need to train in your socks. That just looks kind of weird, especially if you have lifting shoes next to you. Every time I look over and I see somebody in socks with a pair of lifting shoes off on the ground next to them, I'm like, oh my God, what's happening here? But so if they're doing it because they have only running shoes, that can actually make sense.
Yeah.
And it's probably something that I would do if I only had running shoes and I was going to squat or deadlift heavy. I would probably take them off. So, or overhead press of any kind, heavy. I'd probably take them off. Why is it so hard to change eating habits? Because it's a learned trait. What your eating habits are, your emotional response to stress, your emotional response to food, you've learned it and you're probably 40, 50, 60 years old. And how easy is it to change something that you've been doing for 60 years? It's difficult, especially when you have, your palate that's become used to certain foods. I guarantee you, the more that you eat whole, minimally processed foods, the easier it becomes, but it takes many, many months. And for people that have listened to me on podcasts, one of the things that I talk about a lot is habit formation, and the research that looks at habit formation suggests that it takes between 18 and 256 days to reach 95% of new habit formation. So, if you're trying to learn to eat differently, it could take the better part of a year. If you are consistent and adherent over that period, the more that you fuck around, the longer that that's going to take. So, if you're constantly every weekend going out and doing your carb cycling and having your two pizzas every weekend, well, yeah, it's going to be harder and harder and harder. And so you're essentially self-sabotaging. And I could lay this out in like, a baby you format, oh, poor you, blah, blah, blah. No, you're self-sabotaging. And so if we accept this, if we acknowledge this, if we realize, hey, maybe what I'm doing isn't supportive of what I'm trying to become, what I'm trying to achieve, then we can make changes to address that. And so I want to point out that habit change, you need to give yourself a break in the fact that you're not going to get it in 2 weeks because you're not, and that's okay. But you do need to take responsibility in how you put this forward, how you view this, and then you can make the changes that will last a lifetime. So it's kind of multifaceted. Anything to add there, Beth?
No, I mean that's a very broad question. I mean, it involves kind of changing who you are also, like at the core of your being and how you view food in general. So I think it's closer to that 256 days than it is
For most people, probably,
than it
yeah. I
is the
mean,
lower end of the range.
yeah, I mean, I hear those. I mean, I've heard this in multiple different formats. It takes 30 days to make a habit is probably the most common one that I've heard. And I laugh about that because that's about the shortest amount of time that it could
Yeah,
possibly take. And so then everybody says, okay, well, it takes 30 days. And then at 30 days, they're like, man, I don't feel anywhere close to being
yeah,
competent in this. And you typically won't be.
yep,
Like there are rare cases where people are, and I've seen some people where like, somebody comes to me and they start working with me one-on-one for nutrition coaching, and they'll say, "Hey, I've had problems with alcohol in the past," and I'll say, "Okay, well, this is a new habit that we want to form. You've had 50 years where you've been drinking or whatever it is, and so let's start to titrate this back, just like we did with the caffeine. How many drinks are you having a week? 24. Okay, that's actually a real number that I had with somebody. 24. Okay, cool. Can we do 16 next week? And can we cut it down and down and down? And I've had some people where I bring this up and they'll say, I'm just not going to have any. And I'm like, I don't recommend that. That's probably really tough on you. And they're like, no, 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 I'm just not going to have any. And on a rare occasion, it's worked. And so some people will say, hey, I have a very all or nothing personality, and so it's my choice, that's the beautiful thing about this. When it's their choice and it doesn't feel imposed on you by like a coach or somebody else, it can be very, very powerful. And people can do some of these things cold turkey. Now, it's not the norm, and so I want to say, hey, give yourself some grace if that's not you. But I have seen it happen, and if you're telling me, if you're thinking while I'm saying this, I would just do better not having that. It would if I had like two or three, it's going to make me want to have 12. Okay, well, that's you've noticed that about yourself, and you can make that choice. And I have seen that work. So be very honest with yourself about what you need and then consciously make that choice and then stick to it. And as long as you're doing that and it is your choice, you're going to do just fine. And so I think that the idea that you have some autonomy over that is what's really important here. We can give you some ideas of what will work best for the majority of people, what could work best for you, and then you make the right choice for yourself. Does the dose of creatine differ between men or women, or is it just body weight? It's mostly body weight. And so there are specific numbers. I always forget what the exact it's like this many milligrams per kilogram, and I don't want to do the math on that. So what I will typically say is it's going to be dependent on what you want to achieve from that supplement. If you want the brain or bone health benefits, you should probably be taking 7 to 10 grams. Even women should probably be taking that much. If you're just looking for the muscle benefits, most women 3 to 5 grams, most men 5 to 7 grams. Okay. The bigger that you are, the more that you might need. If you're like 215, 220, you might need 10 grams for men. But the muscle benefits seem to happen at lower dosages than the brain and potential bone health benefits. When cutting to trim those last bits of fat, which one should we be consuming less, fats or carbs? So, as I said before, and the reason I do want to address this question for a reason. As I said before, as long as we have protein and calories equated in a fat loss phase, you're going to have the same outcomes. It doesn't matter what the ratio of carbs or fats is, as long as those fat minimums are hit. Having said that, when we look at research that looks at people that lose weight successfully and keep it off long term, the trend is that the large majority of them are low fat. That doesn't mean that it's the right move for you. It would not be the right move for me. I would actually rather be low carb. But I will say, if you've got a question between the two, it probably makes more sense to try low fat first. Because for the majority of people, I think it was like 75% of people did better on low fat than they did on low carb. I kind of like that a little bit better. And I say that because if we have more carbs in a diet, we can incorporate more fruits and vegetables. And fruits and vegetables are very filling. They are very nutrient dense. And we already know that we're going to be in a calorie deficit in this fat loss phase. So it probably works, not because of some inherent magic between fats and carbs, but the fact that when you have more carbs, you're more satiated. I think that that's what's going
Higher
on here.
volume. You can eat
Yeah.
higher volume when you have more carbs and less fats than the opposite.
Yeah. So I think what's happening is that people have less hunger and they're more
Agreed.
successful that way.
Agreed. I think that's exactly what it is.
What are good ways to warm up for running and sprinting? You want to take that one, Beth?
Yeah. So, again, we're not proponents of static stretching, and I would not do any sort of static stretching before running and sprinting. I will be very honest. I don't think you need a super long and difficult dynamic warm up for running. Sprinting is a little bit. If we're talking like you're going to be doing 100-meter all out sprints, I would do some plyometric type of work because of what's going to be involved with your calf musculature. So there's different bounding drills and stuff like that that you'll see a lot of sprinters do before they warm up for, a 100 or a 200. But if you're doing like 400-meter repeats or 800-meter repeats, I don't think that that type of thing is necessary. Just making sure that your heart rate is appropriately elevated so you're not going from 0 to 60 at the drop of a dime. Um, and just doing some dynamic stretching of the hips in particular will probably help you feel a lot better. But avoid statically stretching the calves before you run.
Yeah, I think that's great. Now I'm gonna cut this probably just a minute or two short. I've got another obligation that I've got to get to, but there is one last question that I wanted to cover, and I wanted to cover it because it was kind of funny that I just read this after one of the things that I said earlier. There is a lot of hype around NAD supplements. Is it worth taking? Way to make me look stupid. So, okay, hype around NAD supplements. So NAD is a precursor for longevity. This is the thing that people are trying to push for longevity, just to kind of break it down really quickly. Um, does it increase levels in the body of certain things that could be potentially beneficial for longevity? Yes, it does. Has it ever been shown to actually increase longevity and health? No, it hasn't. So this is one of those things that mechanistically, if you raise these levels, it's been theorized on podcasts that this could aid in longevity. Here's the problem with that. One, you're probably not going to be doing anything significant beyond what exercise, stress relief, nutrition, sleep, the stuff that we actually push, the big rocks. This is probably not going to do anything beyond what that provides anyways. So you're probably just wasting money. On top of it, this has never been shown in the research, and so they're making a mechanistic leap. If we use the same level of of thought process, I could argue that taking NAD and NMN elevates cellular NAD levels as well. I could argue that this could exacerbate chronic inflammation by increasing the release of cytokines from dying cells. So, just as likely using the logic, and I don't like the logic in either direction. I'm just pointing it out. I'm playing devil's advocate to show you how stupid of a leap it is to say NAD supplements will increase your longevity, I could make a just as strong argument that is going to massively cause systemic inflammation in your body. And so people love hearing mechanistic leaps when it's something that tells you what you want to hear. They don't like seeing the exact same level of leap in the opposite direction. And so my message for you here is it's probably best to do the things that we know work and let your body manage itself. You know, we're not going to trick our body into doing all of these like magical things. And so by taking all of these supplements that don't necessarily have long-term safety data or don't necessarily show that they do these beneficial things without consequence, you could end up hurting yourself more than anything. Or most likely, I don't actually think that that's going to happen. I don't think that it's going to cause this massive pro-inflammatory state. What I think is going to happen is you're going to run out of money. I think that it's just going to be a waste of money. So I just wanted to play devil's advocate there and say, hey, look, it's awesome when someone tells you what you want to hear, but I can use the same level of data to tell you something that you don't want to hear. Now, do you just ignore what I said and accept what they said? And so mechanistic data can be used to say a lot of different things because it doesn't take into account what the rest of the body is doing. It's looking at this one mechanism as a snapshot, not looking at whatever else is going on in the body and assuming that what this one thing is doing in this one cell is what's going to overtake the entire body. And it's not what happens. So ignore NAD until we have better data to suggest that it's something worthwhile. Okay. That is it for today, guys. Thank you from me and Coach Beth. We will see you next week at the next live Q&A podcast. And, feel free to reach out with any questions you have. Until then, our social media, on Instagram, in our Facebook group, or in our Mighty Networks community. Take it easy.
Bye, everyone.